This is Dr. Rob Harder with the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast, Making Your World Better. What does it take to be an effective nonprofit leader today? What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest obstacles? How should nonprofits fundraise in an economy that is constantly changing? All of these reasons combined led me to start this show. And it's my hope that through this series, people can learn not only what it takes to be an effective nonprofit organization, but to hear from effective leaders who are successfully making a positive impact in their communities. We hope you enjoy the show as together we hear how they are making their world better. Hello, podcast listeners. Thanks so much for tuning in. Whether you are driving right now, you're in your home, you're at the gym, welcome. We're so glad you're part of the nonprofit leadership community. And today's topic, I think we're going to be inspired, but it's a tough topic. Let me just start out with a couple of stats. Did you know that every year there are 7 million hotline calls to child welfare? Every year, 7 million. It's staggering and gut-wrenching. Now, of those 7 million kids, currently 400,000 of them have been put into the U.S. foster care system. I think for most people, it's no secret that our current foster care system is overloaded. And my guest on today's show saw that need and decided to come up with a creative solution to help the foster care system. So he came up with a creative way to use technology to provide help for kids in crisis. My guest today is Adrien Lewis. He's the founder and president of CarePortal. In short, CarePortal is an app that connects families in crisis to real-time support. Today, we discuss both what prompted him to start CarePortal in the first place, but we'll also spend the bulk of our time together talking about leadership and specifically leading with courage. In other words, what does courageous leadership look like? How does he define it? And how can it help you become a better leader? Well, as always, thanks for tuning in. Now on to the show. This podcast is sponsored by DonorBox. DonorBox, helping you help others with the best donation forms in the business. Well, welcome, Adrien, to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm so glad to be here, brother. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Well, this is going to be a really exciting interview just because what you're doing is so critical. As I was mentioning earlier, I get a chance to have a lot of different speakers on this podcast, and they're all doing great work. And you're right in that line of just doing critical work with such a big need that often we just don't talk about, I don't think, enough. And I think partly because the stats aren't great and they're a bit, depressing depending on what perspective you have with it. So just to kick things off, for my listeners, I want to let you know that there are currently today more than 400,000 children in the U.S. foster care system. Now, the organization you, Adrien, started about 9 years ago, I understand, is called CarePortal. And essentially, CarePortal is an app that connects families in crisis to real-time support. So for all those 400,000 children that need help, this is really what has motivated you to get started. And as I understand it, the platform receives over 100 requests daily. So get that, nonprofit leaders, over 100 requests every day from government agencies across the nation, seeking local providers to aid parents in these situations. So let's just get a little bit of your history, why you started it, why did you start CarePortal in the first place, and what prompted you to do it?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Rob. And it is sad. It is sad to think about those 400,000 kids who are in the foster care system. But the problem is even more gut-wrenching than that. So when you think about who those kids are and where they're coming from, the circumstances of their life, there's actually 7 million hotline calls to child welfare every year for 7 million children. And of those 7 million children, some of them it kind of gets dismissed, but lots of them, they're now on the radar of child welfare. And for 400,000 or so, they end up in the system. And so when we start thinking about in this amazing country we live in, who are the most vulnerable children in our communities? It's these 7 million kids. They're the most vulnerable. And some time ago, God called me out of my business to join a ministry that serves kids and families in crisis across the world through churches. And along the way, we decided, you know what? We're not just going to work internationally, but we're going to also focus here in our own backyard. Now, I live in Kansas City, or we're home based in Kansas City. And so we began to think about that. How can we pursue this? And my wife and I became foster adoptive parents. I have 6 kids total, 3 we adopted through foster care. And so we're learning the system. Our organization is trying to figure out how do we really reach these kids and make a difference in their life here? And we failed for a long time. Like we failed. We were trying to mobilize local churches to step in and foster or adopt these children. And the truth is, that's a really tall ask. I mean, you have kids, and the idea of bringing kids into your home, kids are hard automatic already, but the idea of bringing kids into your home that are not yours and all the possibilities that come with that, it's like a 6 foot kind of barrier, And so over a couple year period of time, we're learning and failing and learning and failing. We just got to the place where we had this summary document of all the things we've been learning. And I'm reading that document one day and just get this very clear vision for how to make that 6 foot bar like a 6 inch bar, and how we could leverage technology to identify kids and families who are in crisis in real time and match them to people in proximity that wanted to help. So that was the vision. And so it wasn't just like, can you foster or adopt? The vision was, if you knew of a single mom who was in your zip code and she just left an abusive relationship and she needed some beds in this new apartment that she's in order to get her kids back out of the foster care system. Would you just be willing to receive an email to make you aware of that need? And when we started thinking that way, and we started thinking, gosh, helping families stay together is a huge way to impact the foster care system.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, so another key service you provide through CarePortal is that CarePortal enacts community-based intervention that really helps parents get the support they need to be able to care for the children over the long term. Now, there's fragmented families, right, are able to reconnect through CarePortal. You've also found, though, that your work has really helped address this stat that 76% of child welfare cases spring from neglect related to poverty. So going back to what you were just sharing about, some people need furniture, they need some basic needs. Talk about the impact you're having through the CarePortal when it comes to this, really the neglect through poverty that you bump into when it comes to these families.
Yeah, it's a big deal, Rob, because when you think about the kids who are removed, some are removed because of abuse, right? And they need to be. It's not safe for them to be home. And the kids who my family brought in, that was their reality, right? They needed to be somewhere else because it wasn't safe. But something I was wrong about, 12 years ago, I was wrong believing that this was the story for all the kids, that all the kids had been abused. And it was even worse than my judgment was that these were bad parents who didn't deserve to have their kids. And I'm glad that I was wrong. And I'm glad that I know that I was wrong, because so much of the time, these parents are not abusing their kids. They're in poverty or maybe addiction or maybe isolation, and something crazy happens. And the next thing you know, they have no margin. And now they're on the radar of the child welfare system. And now the child welfare system's all in their business. And it's really hard to succeed when you're in that demographic and you don't have the margin that you and I have, Rob. Like if something happens in your life, you lose your job, you have an illness, something happens to one of your kids, you have a network of people who are going to come alongside and walk with you and help you, and like you're 10 steps or more from the bottom. You know what I'm saying? Same for me. But families who are on the brink. So I'm answering your question. How does CarePortal help? Most of the requests that come into CarePortal are to try to prevent a child from going into foster care, or to try to help a kinship relative who's it could be a neighbor, it could be a cousin, it could be an aunt or grandma who's like, oh, I can actually take these kids in and them not have to go into the system. So when those requests related to poverty and things of that nature come into CarePortal, it's just a matter of removing some small barriers some physical barriers to stabilize that family and to give them some hope that they can actually press on. And so when somebody from CarePortal Network shows up and brings the bed, there's actually a transfer of hope that happens. And when somebody is in poverty, what they need is the thing and the hope that they can press on.
Well, I really like that emphasis on two things you mentioned. The prevention side. I think that probably is a surprise to a lot of people that you really are working just as much on the prevention side of just then reacting to the situation of, say, kids that are in an abusive home or unsafe home. And then I really like that idea of giving hope. I've had people on the show sometimes will ask that question, what is giving you hope today? Because obviously you and many of my guests, my own work that I do at the nonprofit I lead, sometimes it can be discouraging, right? That the issues are so big, the needs are so huge that you feel like, what I'm just doing a drop in the bucket a little bit. And so I love the idea for the people that you're serving and for those who are gathered around supporting your efforts, you are creating some hope. Now, that's a good segue because I wanted not just to talk about CarePortal, which is you're doing great work, of course, but really dip a bit into your leadership and your experience because you've had a lot of good experience in the past. Let's talk specifically about the leadership and how you've led over the years in your various experience over the last several years, because this podcast really is dedicated to leadership. And you're a big proponent of leading with courage. So I want to talk about that. What does courage and leading with courage look like for you?
So if you ask most people what they fear the most, it's failure. Fear of failure holds them back from trying new things, thinking new ways, going for it in the biggest way they possibly can. And really, courage is not about not being afraid. Courage is about pushing through your fear to go for it. And maybe you do fail along the way. You probably do actually sometime. But failure is not final. It's not the end. And yeah, and so the idea of courage being a core fundamental belief that we are going to approach the world and our work and our family without saying, I'm going to shrink back from hard things, but saying, I'm actually going to lean into those hard things. And as a nonprofit leader, I mean, there's fundraising fear. I mean, there's like staffing fears. There's all kinds of things as a nonprofit leader that you're up against. Is the work I'm doing even going to make a difference? Fear. And so if you let those fears trap you, then you end up not being bold. And I think most nonprofit leaders go into the work that they're doing because they have a strong desire to change the world. They want to be part of the difference maker, right? They want to be part of the solution in their community or state or country where, because of the work that we're doing, somebody's life is being transformed. There is good happening. And I'm just fully committed to the idea that the best things can't happen without courage.
That's good. Well, again, my listeners, or at least a large percentage of them, are part of organizations or either leading as executive directors or development directors, maybe on the board. So let's take it from not just individual courage to a culture or an organization. I do think when it comes to leading with courage, how does a leader then not just lead with courage, but build a culture of courage in their organization? What are the main ingredients that mark a culture of courage, if you will?
It's good. So we've been working on towards this for a long time. Courage has been one of our core principles, and one of the things that we do is we celebrate it, right? Like we let people know when there's something that we're approaching and it's hard. We see people being courageous and we acknowledge that in them. When we're doing reviews, we point to examples of people being courageous and how that's making a difference in the work that we're all trying to do together. And so just talking about being courageous here and there doesn't build a culture of courage. It really has to be woven into the process of how you lead in your organization. But here's the thing, like courage by itself can sometimes turn into arrogance. Courage by itself can sometimes turn into bravado, like I, I did it. It can become prideful, right? And so courage by itself might put you out of balance. There's something else really important that needs to come alongside.
Ooh, that's good. Yeah, let's get into that a little bit more. So, when it comes to building a culture of courage along the way, I would agree that an organization needs to really be able to emphasize that perfection is not necessary for success. The goal is not perfection. I'm guessing you'd say something like it's progress, right? Moving forward. So, talk more about how a leader really creates a culture that acknowledges people's mistakes on the one hand as being normal, but it also really addresses what you said earlier, that fear of failure really is strong. And just a little side note, we, as an organization that I lead, we actually went through Brene Brown's book last year about leading with courage, essentially. And the big idea of being vulnerable as a leader is so counterintuitive of everything I learned about leadership and the examples I saw as I was growing as a leader. And yet I've tried to be more of a vulnerable leader and tried to have this kind of culture of courage. And I do think it does work. Like, it's important. It's not just that it works. It actually creates this scenario where people, if the leader, the executive director, or the management team is open about their mistakes, they're not trying for perfection, it actually kind of like brings those barriers down to say, okay, hey, we're all human, we all make mistakes. Now let's work together towards what our goal and our mission is, knowing that, yep, we're going to make some more mistakes. So is that kind of what you would get at when it comes to creating that culture of courage, or what does it look like in your mind?
Yeah, you're saying all the descriptors. The word that we use to just put it in a capsule is humility. So when you are courageous, you step into things that you're afraid of and you go for it. And sometimes you make mistakes and sometimes you win. But when you pair humility with courage, now all of a sudden you're you're giving your organization, your leaders, a opportunity to say, it's not all about me. And I can own my mistakes. And it's okay that I make mistakes along the way. And my mistakes are not going to be the nail in the coffin that kills us. And so as a leader, as a founder and president, I have a responsibility to demonstrate humility as much as anybody in the organization. You could even potentially argue more. And why? Because leaders have a responsibility to set the tone, And so it is not an uncommon thing for for me to intentionally, publicly admit a mistake and apologize to people who I may have hurt or wronged. And I'll give you a real time example. Last week we had our first ever CarePortal conference. Right, we had 600 leaders from across the country come, and it was an amazing conference. I mean, just on all kinds of levels. And so, after the day after the conference, it was just our 25 or so key leaders were left, and two of them were the people who emceed the conference. The fun people. They create the energy. They do all that, and they had never done this before, and they just did an amazing job. And I found myself through the conference when I was speaking, I was thanking different folks for doing different things. And the day after the conference, I wake up and I'm like, these two folks were in front of that audience for 3 days. And I did not publicly thank them. Like, I missed it. Yeah. So I wake up with that conviction. I go into this meeting that morning with them and 25 other leaders. And I told them in front of everybody, like, I am sorry. I missed this. Would you please forgive me? And it's hard for me to share the example. Like, I wouldn't just be saying this because it seems prideful for me to even talk about humility. Except I'm talking to other leaders. And if the goal here is for other nonprofit leaders to be inspired by what is possible and get a vision for what can be, like this kind of this is what humility looks like. And you would think the opposite of what is true. You would think you go to those meetings, and if you admit your mistakes and you're wrong and you may have hurt somebody in front of everybody, that people will think less of you. That's actually not true. Never true, ever. You know? And so, you know, I just, courage and humility are like the dynamic duo, right? When you put them together, you empower your people to be everything they were created to be and set them free from fear of failure and perfectionism. It is a beautiful thing.
We'll be right back. Are you looking for an easy and effective way to boost your nonprofit's donations? Look no further than DonorBox, the online fundraising platform that streamlines your fundraising efforts, maximizes donations, and simplifies giving for your supporters. With DonorBox, you can create beautiful donation forms, accept digital wallet payments, track donations, and send auto receipts. And the best part? There are no setup or monthly fees and no long-term contracts required. So what are you waiting for? Visit donorbox.org today to get started. That is donorbox.org. Are you ready to revolutionize your advocacy efforts and significantly impact policy change? Discover Quorum and level up your advocacy to better educate more lawmakers. Quorum is the only unified public affairs platform that empowers nonprofits to map, track, change, and report on the policy landscape, all in one place. Explore how Quorum Grassroots helps nonprofits create compelling campaigns in minutes. The result? Your nonprofit doesn't just participate in the advocacy, it drives it. Quorum, where influence meets innovation. You can learn more at quorum.us. Hey, friends, and thanks so much for listening to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. I want to let you know that I've recently become a professional certified coach. With my nearly 30 years of nonprofit experience, I know firsthand how hard you work as a leader. I also know how important it is to have someone you can call on to get help with the barriers, the leadership challenges that you will face both professionally and personally. And I really want people to thrive, to become all they were meant to become by providing coaching and consulting services. So if coaching is something you've always been interested in, but maybe weren't quite sure what it was all about, I encourage you to reach out. You can go to my website, robharder.com, or just email me at rob@robharder.com. I would happy to provide a free sample coaching session so you can determine if coaching is for you. All right, thanks again for tuning in. Now back to the show. I love how you're combining that courage and humility, because I definitely agree that when you have a leader that combines courage and humility, it actually can fuel innovation, right? It fosters greater trust, as you mentioned. It actually can propel nonprofits towards their goals better. But there's barriers, right? It's not something that's intuitive. I think for a lot of us, we resist it. You just mentioned before, you think the opposite. If you own up to your mistakes, you think people are going to lose trust in you and you lose credibility in front of their eyes. So what are those big barriers and how can we overcome those barriers that keep us from being both courageous and humble at the same time?
If I could just boil it down to a word, I think it's pride. I think it's pride. I think when I am not being courageous or humble, it's generally because I am afraid of how somebody else is going to perceive me. I am afraid of what impact this might have on me. There's a very self-interest in there when you hold back from being courageous or humble, and it's pride. And as a leader, I mean, pride can kill you. Pride is certainly a limiter on what is possible through your organization and through your life, like how you express yourself and make a difference in this world. The more it's about me, then the less effective I'm actually going to be in accomplishing the things that I want to. And as nonprofit leaders, listen, we're not in this to make $1 million. Like, this is not our chief motive. We're not profit motivated. We're impact motivated. We're doing this, maybe sacrificing other things we could be doing that would bring worldly treasures and so on and so on. And so if we get rooted in why am I leading a nonprofit? I'm trying to change the world. It is not about me. That pride barrier we got to fight with it like all the time. I'm not absolved from fighting with my own desire to be proud of all the things, but the fight is worth the fighting. Like it's worth it to fight that thing.
No, well said. Well, good. Well, let's move into some great collaboration that you have provided with different organizations. And specifically, you have helped foster a collaboration between the Stand Together Foundation, which we've had, Evan was on the show, and you've also worked with like-minded organizations, faith communities, in order to implement this care sharing, which is really all about meeting urgent needs at the most local and relational level possible. Tell us more about this collaborative effort and what have been the results so far.
Yeah, I am a big fan of the work that Stand Together Foundation is doing. And as a side note here, one of their primary objectives and capabilities is to identify best in class nonprofits and invest in them with time, talent, treasure, all the things to help them be as effective as possible. And so, for your nonprofit leaders who are listening, the Stand Together Foundation could be a place where the benefits I'm about to tell you about could be yours. Like that's a possibility. And so what we've done with the Stand Together Foundation is to come into the fold of the catalysts, that's what they call them, and learn from them. Uh, Humble ourselves to say we don't have this all figured out, and take advantage of the principle-based management skills that they're teaching us and the storytelling skills that they're teaching us. And as we leaned in to Stand Together, the vision that CarePortal has to make care sharing as ubiquitous as ride sharing, this idea of helping neighbors see and serve neighbors at scale, that vision was appealing to them and to Stand Together. And it's actually very closely tied to the reason they exist, to empower every person to really bring bottom up solutions in the community. And so what we found was there's some mutual benefit between our organizations. And this is really the heart of your question. It's like, what does it look like to identify organizations where there is mutual benefit, that there is synergy that happens if we come together and we figure out where the overlap is between us and we really just capitalize on that. And so our posture as an organization is always to look for the mutual benefit. And we don't have to agree with everybody about everything, but where we find that common ground that we both have an assignment to accomplish, then we work hard to try to accomplish that. And so Stand Together is it's our biggest example of partnership because we're doing this at a national scale. They have woven care sharing into one of their key objectives of their organization, right? Care sharing is frames up all it is that we're trying to do in the first place. And so in some ways, we're going to succeed or fail together on this. And that's a risk. But if you're going to be courageous and humble, you're going to take some risks.
That's right. Exactly. Well, good stuff. Well, we've been talking about leadership quite a bit. Is there a leader that you really admire, or maybe has really shaped your own leadership style that reflects really this combination of being both courageous and humble?
Yeah, I thought about this, and I'm going to tell you two, if that's okay. Yeah. So the first one is Jesus. Like I can't think of a better example of someone who's courageous and humble to such a point that gave his life for people, for the world, and led others to do the same by the masses. And so as a believer, I'm still following Jesus. His in every way. But I think what you're asking me is like a human being who's alive right now. And so that person that came to my mind is actually Andy Crouch.
Okay. Yeah.
Andy Crouch is an author. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, I am actually. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. He's an author. He's written several books. He's a speaker. He's a teacher. And what I really admire about Andy is he knows his lane. Like he knows his particular giftings and assignment. He doesn't try to be all things to all people. He's not jealous of other people's successes or the path they take. No, like I see Andy, following the path that he's supposed to follow and encouraging people to do their thing, their best. And those are all super strong leadership skills. He doesn't lead an organization from the front. He's part of Praxis as the organization, which again, nonprofits, I just encourage you to check them out. But he leads from the side in his gifting. And that's a really beautiful thing to watch.
Thanks for sharing that. That's cool. And I'll check out Praxis. Yeah, and I've heard of him because the couple of books he's written about culture and how to, work within culture. So very, very good. Well, as always, I always like to give my guests an opportunity to talk about how people that are listening to this podcast can connect with you, learn more about CarePortal. But I also heard from you, I want to mention on the show, you've got a pretty cool thing coming up with a possible film coming out, I think in June or July. So maybe you could talk about that and then also tell my listeners how they can connect with you if they like to learn a little bit more about CarePortal.
Yeah, awesome. Well, the first one I'll touch on is just go to careportal.org. You can get involved as an individual. You can get involved as a nonprofit. You can get involved as a church. You can get involved as a business. There is room for everybody to participate on the CarePortal platform and in the networks that we create. And so if there's interest in from any of those angles, being part of seeing and serving neighbors at scale, then CarePortal could be a really good resource for you, right? We don't do the ministry. We don't do the nonprofit work. We empower others who do, right? That's what we do. So careportal.org. As far as the film is concerned, brother, this is crazy. In the late 90s, there's this small church in East Texas, a place called Possum Trot.
What a great name. Possum Trot. All right.
Possum Trot, Texas. And in that community, 22 families adopted 77 of the hardest to place children in the Texas child welfare system.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
77.
That's incredible. Right? Yeah.
It was incredible. W.C. Martin and his wife, Donna, they led that church. They led the charge. They brought kids in their own home and this turned into this amazing movement. They're actually responsible for inspiring thousands and thousands of people to get on this journey to become foster or adoptive parents. And so this true story has been made, and CarePortal has been part of helping bring that story to life. It's going to be released through Angel Studios. It's a full feature film. It'll be in 1,200 theaters plus across the country. It's called Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot. And it's really kind of a round two from the Sound of Freedom that came out last July. And the idea here is not only for people to see this film and be inspired, but there's an impact campaign on the back end of it. And CarePortal as a nonprofit is driving the impact campaign. How can we help people get involved in their way, where they live, to be part of the solution? And so, as nonprofits, I'm encouraging people to go see the film and be inspired by what is possible when people really give themselves away and see what happens.
Oh, that sounds great. So again, Sound of Hope. Yeah, I do think film has the ability to inspire people to want to do something in response to what they just watched. So great stuff. Well, thank you again, Adrien, for being on the show. Thanks for sharing your insights. And thanks for what you're doing. You're really providing this great network for people to care for some of these kids who really need it the most. They'll fall through the cracks otherwise if it was for CarePortal. So again, thanks for being on the show and for all you do.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. Nice to meet you, Rob.
Hey, friends. Well, I wanted you to know that this podcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to other podcasts. I also want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others. This will actually help us get this great content out to more nonprofit leaders just like you. You can also join the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast community. Find other resources and interviews of past guests all on my website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Well, thanks again for listening. And until next time, keep making your world better. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Go to YouTube and look up Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. We'll see you there. This podcast is sponsored by DonorBox. DonorBox, helping you help others with the best donation forms in the business.